Hi everybody, my name is Alexia Lidas. I'm the General Manager of Strategic Innovation and Enterprise at the Australian Institute of Architects. Thank you for joining us today. Today's a really special session which I'm quite excited about. A couple of months back I reached out to Liam Wallis of Hip vs Hype, and I'd been looking up their company online for quite a while because I was very interested in two things: the products that they were developing and bringing out to market, but also their business model. So I'm very excited for you to hear from Liam today and be able to learn a bit more about the business and the way that they're going to market. I believe the Hip vs Hype model is quite agile and innovative. The multidisciplinary approach is something that I think is the future of our industry and something that people online today would be interested to learn about. The team are bolstered with the skills and background of architecture, property development, property finance, urban advocacy, sustainability and law. So it's quite innovative for a small team. Liam, how many do you have in your team, just to check?
There's 14 of us at the moment.
So that background amongst 14 people is quite unusual. And that's why I initially reached out. I was really excited about those two things. They're utilising this multidisciplinary skill set to deliver sustainable design in property development, cities, policy, and a lot more, which you'll learn about today. I think that there's an elephant in the room when we're talking about sustainability in the industry, that while we might have aspirations that hit our designs, they don't often hit built form. And I thought with Liam's background, we'd be able to get some insights from him as a property developer and also an architect on the difficulties in ensuring sustainable design is not value engineered out of projects. This is something that we all have to face as a challenge in our industry and are looking to overcome. So I'm going to hand over to Liam to give his presentation. As usual, we'll work with the regular model today, where Liam will present. Questions can come into the chat box at any time, and when he's finished presenting, I'll go through them once at a time.
Thanks for joining in today, guys, and thanks for your interest, I guess, more broadly in our approach and our model. Getting sustainability, sustainable design over the line. I guess today I thought I'd focus a little bit more on developer side, developer incentive, and some of the drivers really that impact on that development equation that sort of lead to decisions being made in a certain way, rather than getting caught up in so much, the issue around defining what sustainable design is and those sustainable design initiatives. We've got people within our business that fundamentally do that. That's not my bag. I run the development side of things. So just as a summary, we'll run you through our approach, who we are, what we do, how we do it, a little bit about our process. Be keen to get into a little bit more detail with you around the developer incentive. We'll define that one up a little bit to help you understand that one. And then we'll spin through some case study projects, so some recent projects of ours, and I'll seek to weave in some of those kind of fundamental settings, the developer incentives that are at play, and how we utilise those different settings in the different projects to achieve the outcomes that we did. And then shoot some questions at me if you like. So our business, Hip vs Hype, we're an ethical, socially conscious and environmentally focused property developer, sustainability consultancy practice and workshare provider. So there's those three component parts to our business. Fundamentally, our aim is to influence and to build the safe, sustainable, inspiring future we deserve. And we reckon it's our responsibility to leave our cities and regions in a better condition than we found them. We're a business, but our fundamental driver is to improve the world around us, particularly the built environment. This is a snapshot of our recently completed project, Ruskin Elwood, down in Elwood in Victoria. Our values, I was kind of sitting with this one a little bit in preparing this presentation. Our founding values as a business were to seek to work with people and organisations who value sustainability and recognise the need for positive change. We've kind of moved on a little bit from that. We're actually up for more difficult challenges these days. I guess the broader challenge around kind of climate change and sustainability requires us to change hearts and minds. And we're really on a journey at the moment of figuring out how best to do that in a broader mainstream context. I think that's the real challenge these days. As a startup business, we're really focused on trying to find clients, who are already on board These days, that's the challenges move beyond that point. So probably going to have to rewrite that one. At the heart of our business, we are a business. We're a profit-making entity. We don't shy away from that. We think that's fundamentally important. What we don't think is okay is the seeking profit at the expense of people and planet. So we're about balance. We're about rebalancing those priorities. Profit shouldn't come at the expense of people and planet, nor should necessarily people come at the expense of prosperity or planet. In essence, over time, that balance is fundamentally important, we believe, in order to achieve a sustainable, resilient position. So there's three component parts to our business: our projects team, which is fundamentally a development company. We're focused on delivering durable, low impact, high performance housing and precincts that are environmentally sustainable and connected to the communities in which they're built. So the environmental and social aspect is fundamentally important. Now, obviously, the prosperity component, if we don't get that right, we don't exist. So we can't do great projects. And that's one of our drivers. Sustainability, at its heart, an advisory consultancy. So we're advising and working with a number of state governments, local councils, institutions and businesses across a variety of sectors around Australia. We're focused at building scale and also cities and regional scale. And the additional component is the workshare component to our business. So this idea it's really at the heart of cultural idea. It's about surrounding ourselves with ideas and perspectives that challenge our organisational culture on a daily basis. And we've set up 2 workshare spaces. We've got another workshare space in the works down here in Melbourne at the moment. And it's really this idea about, our organisational culture doesn't become stale or become a monoculture by virtue of kind of, groupthink weaving its way in. We have other businesses around us, experts in carbon, water, urban ecology, graphics, law, accounting, digital marketing, and these kind of businesses are running their own businesses on a daily basis. They're challenging us. We're also feeding off each other, so we're able to, collaborate with some of those businesses, and likewise, they're able to create opportunities for us. So it's that daily exchange of ideas and energy, which is a critical component part to the collective workshare spaces that we've established. And then our people. This is a snapshot of our projects team. Alexia kind of covered it before. We're really focused on a multi-disciplinary skill set within our team. So if I go from left to right, James is a project manager. He's spent a number of years with a high-end building company in Melbourne called Visioneer. For us, it's fundamentally important, if we're trying to deliver better outcomes, that our people have hands-on experience of how buildings are actually built, what it takes, are able to communicate effectively with trades and builders on site, and kind of circumvent some of the complexities that can get embedded in the process. Next up to Katia. She's a 2-time Olympian, and she brings that experience into the business. In ski cross, but she is also our in-house sales lead. So Katia is a registered real estate agent. We sell our own projects. That's an important part of our model, having that direct relationship with our customers. Pre-sales, sales, post-sales, and into occupation. And I'll talk a little bit about our process in a second. That's me in the middle. My background, I sort of went into university, studied art science, and then found this really great degree called architecture that kind of combined all of my interests, creative, technical, kind of historical, political, and kind of entered into that rabbit hole. And I spent some time over in Copenhagen at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, and that was my exposure to, I guess, some really great architecture, some really great buildings, both institutional and commercial. And And my experience in Copenhagen really led me to want to understand how it was, what were those financial project settings that were enabling these really great outcomes. So I kind of came back from Copenhagen and signed up for the double degree at Melbourne with property finance, and it's really kind of been my journey from there. I've worked primarily in commercial development. And my aim has been to sort of enable better design and sustainability outcomes by virtue of having that sound understanding of what, I guess, drives the decision-making process from client side. So Guy's up next. Guy's actually over in Europe at the moment. He's trapped somewhere in Holland. I don't know, we get Instagram updates every second day. He brings that on-site experience. So having worked for a number of years with a company called Figurehead down here in Melbourne, it's a pretty solid tier 3 to tier 2 builder. Again, just that detailed understanding of how buildings are put together and relationships with subcontractors and trades is integral. And then Laura, who heads up our marketing team, and she runs with our urban advocacy. She's a trained lawyer. She's worked with a number of larger developers, PwC on legal side, and again brings a really, really well-rounded approach and passion for better urban outcomes. So our process, the reason why I went into our projects team in a little bit more detail is just to give you a little bit of a deeper understanding of the skill set that exists within the business. And our process is defined by cross-collaborative interaction. We're very pragmatic, we're evidence-based, and we have a focus on feedback loops. We fundamentally believe that enables us to achieve better and more innovative outcomes over time. So if we look at the typical stages in a development project for us, we've got acquisition, design, sales, construction, and then occupation phase. You start to think about the feedback loops that exist between each of those phases. So kind of fundamentally decisions that are made in acquisition around site yield, setbacks, height, start to really embed drivers that have impacts all the way through. So for us, as an example, what we learn in design on one project gets fed back into our acquisition process for our next project. What we learn through a sales phase in one particular project gets fed back into the design process on current or next projects. What we learn through construction gets fed back into sales, gets fed back into design, gets fed back into acquisition. It's fundamentally important, that loop. That's probably where I spend most of my time. And then occupation, this is a real focus, an area of growth for our business, and bringing someone like Claire Parry into our team as technical building lead, a Better Buildings lead, really gives us an ability to spend a lot more time in that post-occupancy evaluation space and undertaking some research with some different institutions and getting that hard data and that evidence, and seeking to feed that back into each of the phases of our process is a really big focus for us at the moment. So the developer incentive, I'm going to ramble my way through this one. It's very complicated and we could definitely spend an entire session on it in its own right. I'm kind of going to limit what I'm talking about today to the develop and divest in the residential space. So a developer who is developing a given project, residential apartments, mixed use component, and is seeking to sell those apartments and those commercial spaces on the open market. Ostensibly, a model like Nightingale fits smack bang into this space as it currently stands. I'm going to define what I talk about today in that context because it's particularly important because as some of you would know, no doubt you're working with clients who are developing and divesting in the commercial space. There's very different settings in that space. I think there's a better ability to quantify the benefits of sustainability in commercial development. There's a more tangible link to bottom line issues around what companies are willing to pay to lease space, the performance of staff over time, et cetera, are much easier to measure, and therefore there's more of a tangible link to the benefits of sustainability. There's kind of that third space, which is develop and hold. So whether that's residential and commercial, whether that's built to rent, or larger institutional players that are developing assets and holding them over time, not divesting them, that's probably where the link to the benefits of sustainability is best established in the market. So today, I'll focus on develop and divest residential, which is primarily our space and where we do most of our development work. It's a really simple equation. The revenue that you're able to sell apartments and retail for, less the cost that it costs you to kind of realize that product, equals the return. And in essence, I guess any business is seeking to obtain a return that enables them to operate the business and seek due reward for the effort and risk taken. I'll come back to that, but this next issue of risk profile comes into play. So what risks are inherent to a process, to a particular development that might impact on that return equation? Things like environmental considerations, which are really hard to quantify prior to acquisition. Things like power lines, things like planning sensitivities in any given location are going to be kind of given a risk-weighted criteria in that acquisition phase. And I guess from an architect's perspective, from a designer's perspective, from a sustainability consultant's perspective, seeking to gain a bit of an understanding of the risk profile and the kind of critical risk matrix inherent to a project is actually pretty important. Kind of gives you a bit of an understanding of how weighted in any given project might be. So some projects, like developers are going to go into acquisition, they might, in order to keep a pipeline moving, they might have to take a position on a certain risk that they might not otherwise take, as an example. So they might be taking they might be hedging on an environmental risk. They might feel uncomfortable about that risk. They'll have allowances in the feasibility, but that might make them particularly nervous about considering, as an example, specific innovative initiatives that might add to the risk profile of the project. So, if you're dealing with a client and you get a sense that the risk settings on any given project are ratcheted right up, that's a pretty good indication that they're probably not going to be in a mood to innovate. So getting sustainability across the line is possibly going to be a little bit more difficult in that context. Not telling lots of you, no doubt, something you don't already know, but that's just something to seek out and seek to understand early on in the process. It'll help you understand how and where to push. Cost of capital is another interesting concept that plays out. Cost of capital from an investment perspective, I guess, as developer, my clients are it's kind of threefold. We have our investors, we have the bank, and we ultimately have our purchasers. They're our clients, if you like, we're I'm very focused on their interests throughout the process. Cost of capital is a concept whereby investors, equity, capital out in the market seeks a return in a period of time. So the risk profile of a project will have an impact on cost of capital. The higher the risk profile, the higher the cost of capital, and time will have an impact on the cost of capital. The longer a project takes, the more capital will cost, and the lower the returns will be ultimately to the developer. So again, sustainable concepts, untested concepts, they add over time to the risk profile. They add to the risk profile of a project. If and by virtue of adding to uncertainty. So if by virtue of adding some new sustainability technology, there might be a chance that, the builder's not quite going to get their head around it. Construction might take 3 months longer. Inherent to a pitch to the bank might be a suggestion that some untested technologies are going to be utilised, and the interest rate might go up a little bit. So there's a real impact on the bottom line. The next one's funding hurdles. So funding hurdles play out. There's usually, in order to get bank finance to fund construction, there'll be a pre-sales hurdle. You'll have to sell generally an amount of pre-sales less GST equivalent to the total amount of money that you're seeking to borrow from the bank. There'll usually be a couple of other allowances in there for sales commissions and sales costs, etc., that'll dilute the value of pre-sales. That's one of the key drivers off the plan sales market. You got to hit your pre-sales in order to get your bank funding. Really, really important. Again, this concept ties into market acceptance. So again, sustainability. How important is sustainability to the end consumer? Is it going to enable you to essentially sell more apartments more quickly to an end buyer? Is it going to increase your market acceptance? That's one of your trigger points when you're talking back to the funding hurdles that are inherent to a developer's drivers. Yes, there's then brand legacy, and this is playing out more and more. For us, it's an absolute fundamental. It's this idea that more and more developers are developing brands, and what outcomes that are achieved on a particular project are leveraged for projects, for the next project and the next project. So it's becoming more and more important for brands to make a commitment to their customers. And deliver on that, and that's a great trigger point. In order to hold your clients, your developer clients, to account through the process. You can't go and make a certain commitment through a sales campaign and then not be delivering through that through the construction phase. And sometimes a polite reminder actually probably go a pretty long way. Generally, I think, development managers, development directors have got a hell of a lot going on, and sometimes it is easy to forget. So they're a little polite reminder, guys, hey, you said this through the campaign, we worked on this through schematic design, and it's getting taken out now. Do you want to, have you really considered that? You'd be surprised. I think asking that question, what sort of outcomes that might achieve sometimes. The last one's moral obligation. I guess, again, for us, that's a fundamental. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing if this wasn't almost one of the most important drivers for us. Goes back to that people, prosperity, planet balancing equation. In the broader development space, I'd kind of argue that the school strike for climate about 12 months ago now has had a tangible impact on kind of the why for a lot of investor developer types out in the market. I'm sure some of you have seen that and kind of interacted with that over the last 12 months, but I know we've definitely found that it's playing out. There is lots of capital out there that is seeking to not only achieve a return, so in line with those traditional cost of capital requirements, but is also seeking to achieve an outcome that's more closely tied to the moral objectives of that investor, that capital. I think we're only going to see growth in that space, and it's probably one of the things that's most exciting for us. So case study projects. So I'll take you through 4 projects. Davison Collaborative is a little 3 townhouse project in Brunswick. It's our Model 3 Tesla. Ruskin Elwood is our kind of Model X high performance 4 townhouse premium project in Elwood. Nightingale 2, which is kind of the most innovative project we've worked on to date, and Ferrars York, which is a flow on from Nightingale 2, and a project that we're about to commence constructing. So I'll run you through the broader risk profile, cost of capital, funding hurdles, market acceptance, brand, legacy, moral obligations. I'll run you through some of those concepts as it relates to each of these projects, and give you a feel for how we were able to make the decisions we were able to make in the context of some of the sustainability initiatives that are included in these projects, and how those decisions related to some of those trigger points. And, I guess the aim of that is to perhaps arm you with some arguments and some evidence for you to take to your clients and prosecute your arguments for the inclusion of sustainable design initiatives. So the Davison Collaborative, small scale, 3 townhouses, interesting project. From a risk profile perspective, risk is low. We bought a single residential residence in Brunswick. The existing residence was in decent nick. It took us quite a long time to get planning approval, but through that period, we were able to rent the house out, derive income, cover holding costs. We really went out of pocket on a holding cost basis for this project. That's a significant one for a developer. If the holding yield on a property is good, then it takes a little bit of pressure off from day one. Again, it's residential. We didn't have an environmental audit overlay, although in Brunswick you probably should, because there's all sorts of stuff buried in backyards. But we didn't have that significant risk to overcome on this project. Funding hurdles, again, we're in the resi space. We don't need pre-sales. We can borrow up to 80% of the value of the land, up to 80% of the value of the construction. Funding hurdles aren't particularly limiting. From a brand perspective, this is all about brand. Chris from Archer Architects took the front residence. Katia and myself are living in the middle residence. I'm in here at the moment. And Pete and Sarah, Pete and I set up our sustainability business. He's off with Green Sync nowadays, but Pete and Sarah took the rear residence. So again, brand and market acceptance. We didn't have to sell. We didn't have to take a position on selling to somebody. Brand was really important. This was a legacy project. We were going to stand behind it. It had to be good. And then moral obligations, it kind of goes without saying. It was one of those key objectives at the beginning of the project. We wanted to undertake a collaborative development. We wanted to push boundaries in sustainability. And we all agreed that's what we're in for. So that probably trumped the finances a little bit on this one, although, we're all having to make sure that we very much don't lose money. And at the end of the day, we've come out in front, which has been a good outcome. So risk setting on this project, really low in the broader context, whilst the amount of money involved was was reasonably large for all of us involved. The chances of kind of getting into trouble and losing that are reasonably low, so we could shoot for the stars. This building, Chris was the architect. We could directly collaborate between Chris and Pete in that exchange between design and sustainability. We had access to our modelling teams, window sizes, positions, glazing, wall build-ups. We ended up going with a SIP structural system for this building. We learned a lot. High density buildings, tight sites, the integration between SIPs and steel is not great. SIPs as a material from a thermal envelope perspective, and speed of construction where you don't have planning constraints that necessitate the inclusion of steel. SIPs has real potential in terms of like high energy ratings, speed of construction, et cetera, just not necessarily in this context. We also more broadly had a planning requirement where we went with the external building material of brick, which, from a long-term resilience perspective is great. We probably don't need to maintain it ever over time. And we went with recycled bricks, so the embodied kind of component to the material is quite low. Just an incredibly wasteful material, though. The number of skips that went off site with kind of mortar full to the brim just really surprised a lot of us, particularly around some of the architectural detailing elements. So, you know, trade-offs in terms of the broader sustainability equation from a life cycle assessment perspective. So again, we did it ourselves, low risk setting. We shot for the stars. We had the skills in-house. You know, we could probably burn a little bit of extra time ourselves to get things right, and really push. Windows from Archer, windows from Bink, working with Sonon batteries, 4.5 kilowatt systems on each townhouse, 7.5 kilowatt batteries in the garage. It's been interesting to track that after moving in. Our house is using between 2 and 4 kilowatts a day at the moment, even being fully occupied, which is pretty incredible, considering it's a 100% electric house, no gas. We work with Stable Eltron on active systems. So being 100% electric, no gas, generating our own electricity on the roof, storing in the battery. We've got an electric heat pump which doubles up. It provides hot water for the kitchen and showers, but it also provides hot water for a hydronic heating system. So integrating systems, not having those two systems is great. We don't have active cooling in this project. We haven't yet gone through a summer, so we'll see how that goes. Stable Eltron heat recovery ventilation system installed as well. I've kind of talked about this before, but and this is, I'll get to this point around evidence. Evidence is critical. It's probably, if there's one thing to take out of this, evidence enables you to talk to the risk settings of a project and start to talk to what developers are really interested in. You know, have you done it before? What does it cost? Does the builder know how to install it? Can he find a subby competitively? Is there more than one subby in the market that can install this brand new system? There often isn't. Has the system been installed in Australia? So often the answers to these questions are no. Part of our journey is to be able to sit in a room with a design team, with the client, and say, you know, here is this great system. It will achieve these outcomes for you. It costs this much. There are 3, you know, trades that can install it. Here are the complexities that the design team needs to think of when coordinating these systems. We need that evidence. Evidence is critical to remove uncertainty and ultimately see more sustainable systems. Sustainable technology installed in our buildings, particularly in this speculative space. So that's at the heart of our process and those feedback loops that I was talking about earlier. So projects like Davison Street provide us with that evidence. COVID's kind of put a spanner in our ability to do postdoc testing on this project, but we've got the crew from RMIT warm on the bench to install sensors as soon as we can. And critically, we want 12 months worth of data at least. We want 4 seasons. How does this building perform through the 4 seasons? And let's get that data in, and let's learn from that data, and let's build a case study, and let's share that with the market more broadly. Let's share that with our clients. You know, our friends, our collaborators, and let's give them the ammunition to see more of this technology and more of this approach deployed in the market. It's part of our broader mission. So I said that this was the Model 3 before, which it kind of is. We've gone for like high performance sustainability at a relatively accessible price point. It's by no means affordable, but you know, each of these 3 townhouses in the Melbourne market, 3-bedroom, 2-level townhouses at about 140 square metres each, probably comes in at about 1.2 million-ish. So relatively affordable for a full-size family home in Brunswick. this is another story here. We had one post-war family residence that had served an Italian migrant family. We've been able to use that exact piece of land, triple its sort of plot ratio, its density, and ultimately we're providing for three dwellings for three families for the next generation. So our next project is Ruskin Elwood, and this is really high performance sustainability. So Ruskin Elwood preceded the Davison Collaborative and is where we developed our approaches to a lot of this technology, and provided ultimately me, I guess, from the developer side input on Davison Street with the confidence, to pursue certain systems that we're able to incorporate. Again, this project went gas-free, 100% electric, solar panels to each of the 4 residences. We worked with Tesla, Powerwall batteries in each of the garages. Again, centralised hot water, electric heat pump combined with hydronic heating. These residences are larger and definitely sitting at that premium scale. There is active cooling in this system, working with Daikin to get the sort of the most efficient systems in that we possibly can. And really our marketing campaign for this project really focused on what is the value of sustainability for, in that premium space. So for us, this project was a develop and sell. The risk profile definitely larger than the Davison Collaborative. This was a joint venture with the existing landowner, and he retained one of the residences. So of the 4, we had 3 to sell. We were targeting benchmark prices for Elwood, so market leading kind of premium price points. Within Elwood, which was definitely a risk, would the market pay the prices that we were asking to enable us to invest in the sustainable technology that was included in these projects? Would the market be willing to pay for that product? So we went for premium design, premium sustainability. What does sustainability mean for health, well-being, occupant comfort? That was really getting to that market acceptance issue that we were talking about before. From a funding perspective, relatively low risk, small scale project, relatively small budget, construction budget around that $6 to $7 million mark. Again, brand legacy and fundamentally important to us, that we stayed true to the promises we'd made from a sustainability perspective and getting to that moral obligation point that I made before. So again, settings that really we were hedging that the market would see the value inherent to the efforts we'd put in terms of design and sustainability, and would pay the premium in this location for the product. That was a significant hedge. We had a really great project partner that also believed in that value. He himself fundamentally saw that value, and so did the market ultimately. So the market sort of really appreciated what had been delivered, and we were able to sell at the prices we needed. That definitely took some belief. But I think a project like this, you can see it by virtue of some of the other development campaigns that are going on around this area more broadly in the market now. I think, the market loves a success story. And as soon as they see something work, they jump all over it. So there's that side to all of this as well, and we're happy to share our learnings. We're after the ripple effect. It's kind of why we exist. So we worked with Fieldwork on this one, and the interiors came up really well. And one of the best things about this project was that we had 2 townhouses facing east-west that were kind of closed off to the canal, and we reorientated and had 4 townhouses running north-south. So all the rooms get natural light, cross-flow ventilation, these beautiful views out over the Elwood Canal, which I guess in a previous generation seemed to be much less of an asset than it seemed to be these days. So citing, this idea of citing being fundamentally important. And we feed that back through those feedback loops. Right? We're kind of feeding that back all the time throughout our team, making sure that each member of our team, we're seeking to gain their insight and feed that back into the process, so we can include it in the sites that we acquire next time. What we learn, how do we include what we learn into what we buy next time, so we don't repeat mistakes, but we leverage on what worked all the time. Nightingale 2, again, it comes back to kind of being obsessed with this idea of the risk profile of a project and trigger points. The Nightingale 2 is a classic example of an incredible project. We're able to achieve so much for this small 6-level, 20 apartment, 16 2-bed, 4 1-bed, no car, 3 retail project in Fairfield, about kind of 10 k's from Melbourne CBD, immediately adjacent to a railway line. So, red lights, bells, alarms are going off already. We literally built this project on the railway platform. So risk profile from a authority risk perspective, incredibly high. But some of the benefits of Nightingale and the broader Nightingale model, this idea of cost of capital. So, our investors, we're targeting a benchmark return of 15% return on cost, which is quite a healthy return in practice. The key for the first 2 Nightingale model projects, I guess, was that our investors accepted a capped return. So the time cost of capital, instead of that accruing on a compounding interest cost basis, our investors accepted a 45% return on equity capped, which was benchmarked back against a 15% return on project cost. And that flexibility and timing ultimately has enabled us to achieve this outcome, the outcome that you guys see before you. So the zero car initiative within this project caused problems from a planning perspective. We ended up at the tribunal, the planning tribunal here called VCAT. A number of local residents struggled to wrap their head around the idea that people could live these days without a car. To their credit, council were supportive, which was great, but that took time. So for a typical project to pursue that argument all the way through to VCAT and to stand behind that argument and to spend the money we had to spend on expert witnesses, et cetera, is really eating into your cost base and really increasing the cost of capital in a standard project. One of the other benefits, market acceptance. So the fact that Nightingale Housing's really cultivated this database of people that want sustainable apartments, gave us the confidence that we'd have buyers lined up. And sure enough, we surveyed buyers early. We had 173 odd people interested in this particular project in this location at the time, and we ran a ballot due to excess demand, and we're able to sell ultimately through a balloting process, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, given the amount of time, energy and effort and cost that goes into a standard sales campaign for a standard developer. So that really released the risk settings. Some of the other things that worked for us on this project, we knew our purchasers. We literally sat across a table from our purchasers and signed up contracts. So we knew who they were. Wasn't sort of just a faceless contract of sale, managed by a third-party agent, signing up some trust, faceless trust as an example. So that played out and helped us get a really good financial deal with the bank. And also the broader sustainability credentials of this project, which is an exciting space. So banks like Bank of Australia are handing developers concessions for sustainability initiatives. They're also handing, the end consumer concessions for projects that meet certain sustainability benchmarks. So there's a reward there that if you're investing in sustainability, the cost of capital can actually be lower. So that's a reward for a developer. I guess the brand and legacy goes without saying for Nightingale. The Nightingale principles are there. They're set in stone and they're fundamental to the whole exercise, and those moral obligations, you know, it's embedded. Not even really worth talking about for this project. So from day dot, we were pushing boundaries. 8.5 stars average, Nat Hers, 100% electric, solar on the roof. Interestingly, our retail spaces sort of act as a battery, as does the centralised hot water system. So when the sun's out and generating electricity, that's getting soaked up by the retail tenancies on the ground floor and also the hot water system. And we're metering all of those electrons that are captured from the sun and sharing them equally between all of the tenancies within the building. So that's a really great initiative. The other thing is, you know, embedded networks sometimes, you know, are seen as a bit of a cash grab for developers. All right, do a deal with an embedded network, sign them up for a really long term, and we get a kickback, you know, over a period of time. And I think that's definitely been the case for a number of embedded networks operating in the market in Australia to date. But we like embedded networks because fundamentally it enables us to buy green power for the entire building at a reduced rate. So you combine the purchasing power of all the tenancies, run it through an embedded network, and we can basically claim that our buildings are carbon neutral in operation, which they are. So it's really about that control. It also allows us to better manage our central systems. It enables us to better manage solar on the rooftop. And that's probably a pretty good example, actually, where, you know, for a Nightingale model style project, the project invested in the solar infrastructure. That was part of the deal. That was part of the promise. I think for your standard developer, solar's a really good example of a technology where they're, particularly for a divestment play, so a develop and sell play, there's very little incentive for a developer to be paying for the cost of a solar system. So planning might require, let's say, 20 kilowatts of solar to be put on a roof. Now developers, the only incentive a developer has to install that solar is that there's a planning requirement requiring that solar to be installed. So that's a good example of those legislative settings within the planning scheme kind of requiring sustainability initiatives. But the developer itself, the benefit of that solar panel really sits with the end user. There's a number of PPA agreements, and this space is pretty interesting, actually. So power purchase agreements. So solar installers are starting to put them together, and embedded network operators are starting to put them together. It's really interesting. So either the installer under these PPAs, either the installer or, let's say, the owners corporation, the embedded network operator will actually own that infrastructure. And it's kind of cool because the settings flip. So the developer will obviously be incentivized to install the minimum amount of solar on the roof, so 20 kilowatts to meet the planning requirement, whereas the embedded network operator or the solar installer is actually incentivized to install the most amount of solar possible. So we've done some benchmarking exercises on our projects, and it's amazing when you flip that incentive how much more solar you can actually fit on a roof. It's incredible. It's like 30 to 40% more generating capacity all of a sudden just magically appears. The way the PPAs work is sort of the installer or the embedded network operator will pay for that infrastructure up front, and then we'll charge the embedded network a rate, usually a rate per kilowatt over time. So there'll be a lease agreement for 10 years, 5 years. Obviously, the longer that agreement is, the cheaper the power will be. And they are then, there's performance hurdles in place under the PPA. So they have to maintain the system, they have to clean it, they have to make sure if the PPA is written well, there'll be a performance requirement inserted. So the solar panels have to generate above a certain percentage of their capacity. Otherwise, there's penalties in place for whoever's essentially owning and selling that power back to the building. This is a really cool example of how some of these kind of financial innovations are starting to flip the incentive and actually acting in the best interests of both the building occupants and, you know, our broader aims when it comes to sustainability. Just a few pictures here. And finally, our last project. This is our project that we're about to commence construction, Ferrars York, in South Melbourne, right next to the South Melbourne market. It's an iteration of Nightingale 2, and that's probably one of the most exciting things for us. The site for Nightingale 2 was 11 odd metres wide and about 40 metres long. So single-loaded apartments over 6 levels with open walkways meant that we could get natural light and ventilation and cross to all apartments and get this really great building typology that related to the street and kind of embedded the building within community really effectively. So kind of as a developer, there's an example of a feedback loop. All right, so this project Nightingale 2 worked well. Let's go. Let's go and find another site with similar attributes. And we did, Ferrars York in South Melbourne. So we're carrying our learning through, which has helped us ultimately set up those key parameters around the risk profile of the site. You know, we have a really good understanding of what this typology costs to build, where we're essentially utilising similar systems, although we're taking the learnings out of Nightingale 2 and we're boosting our learning. One of the critical learnings that we've gotten from post-hoc studies in Nightingale 2 is around sort of more broadly CO2 and humidity. So at 8.5 stars without active ventilation, you know, you start to get build-up of CO2 and humidity. An interesting feedback loop that we've also discovered is around more broadly fire legislation and you know, off the back of some incidents, building surveyors and fire engineers being much more across compliance out on site, so that the apartments and these boxes that we're building are actually incredibly airtight. So we're starting to see that impact. It's kind of probably one of the biggest sleeping issues in the industry. It's less of a sleeper, actually. Most people are aware of it. But what it means is that it's just not an option for us at Ferrars York. We're installing active ventilation systems, which will be of an additional benefit to our purchasers. And I've got to say, having lived in the Davison collaborative now for, you know, the better part of 9 months with our HRV system, you know, the benefits from occupancy comfort and just sheer kind of joy of living in a space are immeasurable. So our task is then to kind of build on that and create a story that we can help ultimately our end consumers better understand on future projects. So this one will come out of the ground shortly. And we've got myself working on it, James, project management lead, working kind of in concert with Claire, Better Buildings lead, working through our pre-commencement construction modelling at the moment. And we'll have our team tracking this project through construction in detail. So talking to trades, talking to suppliers, learning as much detail as we can, and taking that learning and ultimately implementing it into the next building redesign. And, you know, from Claire's perspective, that in-depth, detailed exposure that she's getting to this project in construction is something that we're building into the advice that ultimately she's providing our clients, the architects, other organisations that we work with, to help them achieve better. So to be providing that evidence to support the outcomes that I think many of us want to see. That was a really long ramble.
I think it was great. Thank you so much for that, Liam. And I really appreciate how candid you were with your presentation. That's the sort of information that our industry needs to be able to progress in this space. I'm going to go through the questions one by one. So the first question we had coming through, and so some of these you did touch on a little bit, and you might want to add more to it, or if you don't have anything to add, you can just let us know.
Yep.
So in the post-occupancy evaluation process, what exactly do you cover? Is it a collaboration, which you mentioned?
Yep.
You are in collaboration with one of the universities right now.
Yeah, we are. So RMIT, we're collaborating with RMIT. We have collaborated with RMIT on the postdoc work on Nightingale 2. So the sensors have been in for just over 12 months, and the results of that will be written up by the RMIT team. It's it's an academic process. We have zero influence, which I think is really important. I think more players in the industry need to take that approach. If we're serious about kind of improving outcomes. Obviously there's liability issues to take into consideration, but I think if you're prudent and we're willing to learn from our projects, then that can be managed.
Thank you. And that question was from Brenton Rashid. Thank you for the question, Brenton. The next question is, do you use buildings as material banks, BAM, or similar frameworks in your calculations?
What was that one?
Buildings as material banks, which is BAMB is the acronym. Do you use that or similar frameworks in your calculations?
That's a question for Claire from our team. We haven't undertaken any LCA analysis on any of our projects to date. It's kind of next step for us. We're just about to kick off our LCA on Ferrars York to essentially calculate the embodied carbon in the project. Inherently, our process dictates that we're already seeking to reduce embodied carbon by virtue of the local suppliers that we seek to work with. So local materials, local suppliers where possible, we're already kind of reducing. The LCA process for us on Ferrars York will hopefully teach us a lot. We'll seek to offset that embodied carbon to enable us to go carbon neutral in full. It's a fascinating space and something that we're really hoping to leverage into our future projects around what we learned from the LCA and Ferrars York and how that influences our design process on future projects.
Thank you, Liam. I will just let everybody know that there is some research being done by the University of Western Sydney's Smart Modern Construction team at looking at how they can use blockchain to calculate embodied carbon in buildings. So that's something to keep an eye on. And so that question came from Yara Plaves. Thank you so much for that. Now I have a question from Ingrid Pearson. Is there, I think this is a tricky one, I'm just going to preempt that. Is there a premium that customers, buyers are willing to pay for sustainability incorporated in their apartment? Are we talking percentage or and I mean, what time in the market? It's very variable there. Over to you, Liam, you're the expert.
The answer is no, right? Like the brutal answer is no. And that's why we're finding it so challenging in the broader adoption of sustainability society-wide, right? And why we're finding it so difficult to effectively act against climate change. Because like a lot of these impacts are externalized, so they're not internalized to the broader economic kind of equation. What I will say though is that for us, as a company that has said, hey, we believe in this, we're just gonna commit and go all out, and it's going to be inherent to everything that we do, that there are people out there who rank sustainability more highly on their personal priority list. There's lots of players out in the market. Kind of greenwash is a pretty familiar tool to people, term to people. I think those customers see through it from a mile away. And even more broadly, I think even kind of, mainstream customers see through the greenwash more and more on a daily basis. So it's a broader question. It's sort of like, how much are you going to commit? How much are you going to make it sustainability inherent to your process? How much is that a commitment to your customer And then I think you'll start to see some benefits there where, you know, that niche market becomes a broader market-based adoption, and we see people really putting sustainability at the forefront of their purchase decision. Right now, location and price are everything, right? Even for our customers. So sustainability comes in behind location and price.
Yeah, we are seeing some interesting loans hitting the market in the residential sector, which do preference homes with sustainable technology in them, which is great. But there is a big piece of consumer education that needs to happen, which will help manage the risk for developers to take on these tools. It's a really multifaceted area. Thank you for that question, Ingrid. Now I have a question from Noy Hildebrand. What are your thoughts on the economic issues covered in Passive House Standard, specifically the way that regular energy savings actually reduce the financial risk post-occupation for the life of the loan and beyond?
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that buildings built to higher degrees of energy efficiency and with more integrated systems use less energy, therefore cost less to run. You know, whether you take it to the extreme of Passive House or whether you take it to sort of more broadly Passive House Standard, which would apply to, say, the Davison Collaborative. So you're spending less money to operate a home, and therefore you should be able to afford, let's say, a larger mortgage, or the risk profile to your mortgage should be lower, therefore your interest rate should be lower. Like, as Alexia said, like, those products are on the market. So Bank Australia at the moment have that product. So if your home rate's above 7-star, there's a reduced interest rate available. If your home rate's above, I think, 8-star, there's a further interest rate reduction available. So that's sending a pretty strong signal. Personally, we're super interested in this issue as it relates to kind of more broader social issues around affordability. So, you know, community housing providers and social housing providers, you know, finite budgets, they want to be maximising supply because we've got a whole bunch of people that need housing. How do we, you know, reduce their operational costs so they can build more housing? That question is really interesting, and I think it's where sustainability has a really big part to play as we think about our response to COVID and we think about ramping up the supply of affordable housing. You know, how can we be building that as efficiently as possible now so that the next generation can build more social housing units than we otherwise would have been able to build, because we've baked in, you know, additional kind of operational costs because we haven't quite got sustainability tuned up to where it should be.
Thanks, Liam. Again, yeah, that question touches on similar points. It really comes down to consumer education, open source information, which I really take my hat off to your company and yourself for leading the way and ensuring that the research that you do is shared with the industry. You know, whole of life cycle costing for things like that to the end consumer isn't well understood, which will, that open source information will help shift the market. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is an interesting one, but still important. It's from Joe Frewster. In Ruskin Elwood, how did you address the smells that come off the canal during the hot weather in summer?
It's really interesting, this one, because we did a bunch of analysis, both anecdotal and anybody that lives in the canal in Elwood, anecdotally from our research, absolutely loves the canal. It tends to be the people who either don't live in Elwood or who don't live on the canal who have a broader perception of the smell as being an issue. The people who live like immediately along the canal seem to be less fazed by it, which is interesting. We actually had a look at property prices, and we tried to see if there was any impact on property prices on properties that were located in direct vicinity to the canal, and there's no discernible drop in property value of properties located next to the canal. So that's got to be the key indicator from a developer's perspective. If we ran that data set and we saw like a 5 to 10% drop, we'd be like, whoa, something's going on. So again, it's maybe some interesting insight into how decisions are approached from our side of things.
Thank you for the question, Jo, and thanks for the answer, Liam. I have a question from Graham Hunt. I'm just being mindful of time. We'll have to wrap up soon, everybody. The question from Graham is, have you considered using systems like Illumi's Energy Solar Share to optimise use of solar for apartment owners?
Yes, but again, like initiatives like Illum are probably pretty good where you've got an established apartment building and you haven't had the ability to control the way that you've set the infrastructure up from the beginning. So from our perspective, the maximization of solar by virtue of a PPA, the ability to bolt on battery infrastructure over time and to include EV charging points within the car park, that base infrastructure connected to an embedded network is the best way forward from our perspective with all the work that we've done to date. It's the best way to get the best outcomes for residents over time.
Thank you for that, Liam. Okay, the next question is from Brenton Rashid again. Can you give an idea of the cost of HRV systems?
Yeah, they're not super cheap. I don't have a specific answer on that one. Look, from a Davison Street perspective, somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000. On a per apartment basis, it's less than that. You can't, when you're building to this level of air tightness, you can't not have mechanical ventilation. It doesn't work. We moved into our townhouse in Davison Street, and long story, but basically the roof plumber had stood on one of the ducts in the roof and collapsed it. And when we turned the system on, it collapsed the entire duct system within the roof. So we didn't have the HRV working for the first 4 to 6 weeks we were living in the home. And you really get a sense of like how integral it is when you're building to this level of air tightness, how important it is to have active ventilation. Like it's part of the approach once you get above a certain level of air tightness.
Okay, I'm going to just ask, thank you for that, Liam. One more question. Electric hydronic heating, are you using this to heat the hydronic water pipes, or are you just installing electric insulated wire underfloor heating?
No, electric wire underfloor heating is like chews up shit loads of power. Excuse my language. So yeah, by far and above the sort of the conversion, using the heat pump to convert electrical energy into heat energy and then distribute it within the house is by far and above the most efficient way to do it. Yeah, electric underfloor mat heating. We've used it under bathrooms where we've got tolerance issues, but again, it's an isolated area and not used, like not turned on all the time, so the draw's less. Yeah, no, that's a really quick way to blow your budget.
Okay, well, we've gone only slightly over time. I just want to say sincerely, once again, thank you so much for such a great, open and inspiring presentation. There is a lot of thanks in the chat box, which I'm sure you haven't seen yet. People saying how encouraging a presentation is and inspiring for the future of their work. And I want to make a quick apology to your team, who some of their skill sets I mentioned out in my introduction. So if some of you are watching, I'm saying sorry, I missed you out. But I do think very highly of the team at Hip vs Hype, and you can see why with the fantastic work that they're doing. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope that you come into the next Lean In, and thanks again to Liam.
Thanks, guys. Good luck with it.